A single question hangs over the hemisphere like a gathering storm. What happens when two nuclear superpowers choose Venezuela as the place to challenge American power directly? The answer is unfolding faster than Washington expected, and the consequences now stretch far beyond Latin America itself. In recent weeks, intelligence briefings circulating across U.S. agencies have carried an unmistakable warning tone. The Western Hemisphere, once considered strategically stable, is becoming the newest front line in a global contest that spans from Eastern Europe to the South China Sea. Venezuela, only 2,200 kilometers from the U.S. mainland, has become the symbolic battleground where global influence, military capability, and political will collide. The shift began subtly, but its momentum has now turned unmistakable. For decades, Washington assumed unrivaled dominance in Latin America, relying on geography, alliances, and historic precedent. Yet those assumptions cracked the moment China publicly defended Venezuela against U.S. military pressure. That statement did more than support Caracas. It signaled that Beijing was willing to enter a theater traditionally off-limits, a region the United States once considered uncontested. The shock reverberated through diplomatic circles in Washington, especially because the declaration came precisely as tensions were rising over Venezuela's request for military backing from Russia, China, and even Iran. The request was not symbolic. It included radars, drones, fighter upgrades, and new missile capabilities, all intended to deter U.S. action. This moment did not emerge in a vacuum. It is part of a wider strategic unraveling that defines the Trump administration's geopolitical landscape in 2025. The war in Ukraine grinding into a dangerous stalemate. Israel and Iran exchanging increasingly precise military strikes. China and the US locked in escalating naval maneuvers across the Pacific. Against this global backdrop, Venezuela has become a testing ground, a place where Beijing and Moscow can challenge the United States without entering direct confrontation elsewhere. The pattern mirrors what analysts have observed in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Great powers now press against each other's spheres to probe for weaknesses, hesitation, or limits. Yet, Venezuela is unique. Unlike the South China Sea or the Donbass, this standoff is unfolding alarmingly close to U.S. territory. That geographic proximity amplifies the stakes, with President Donald Trump publicly warning that all options remain on the table to prevent hostile military expansion near American shores. Every new radar shipment, every foreign advisor, or deployed drone risks intensifying the confrontation. The hemisphere has not seen such tension since the Cold War naval standoffs of the early 1960s, when the question of who controlled the Americas carried existential weight. Behind the political drama, however, lies a deeper strategic pattern. Both China and Russia are exploiting a rare convergence of opportunity. Washington's attention is divided across multiple flashpoints. U.S. alliances are stretched, and military planners face simultaneous challenges in Europe and the Indo-Pacific. By reinforcing Venezuela, Beijing and Moscow are turning geography into leverage, signaling that U.S. interference near their borders will be met with reciprocal pressure near Americas. As the new strategic map takes shape, one unsettling question remains. If Venezuela becomes a permanent node of Chinese and Russian power, is the era of uncontested U.S. influence in the hemisphere already over? China's decision to openly defend Venezuela marked a turning point that few analysts believed Beijing was ready to make. In early November, as U.S. threats of potential military action resurfaced, China's foreign ministry broke its characteristic silence. Spokeswoman Mao Ning delivered a clear, unmistakable message. Beijing opposed any use or threat of force against Caracas. It was not a cautious diplomatic statement. It was a declaration of political alignment, telegraphing that China was prepared to confront Washington in a region it had historically approached with extreme caution. For Washington, the message struck at the heart of its long-standing assumption that the Western Hemisphere remained beyond the reach of rival great powers. The timing of China's intervention amplified its impact. The statement came just as leaked reports revealed that Venezuela had formally requested military support not only from Russia, but also from China and Iran. The request included new radars, fighter jet upgrades, surveillance drones, and even missile capability systems explicitly designed to complicate or deter U.S. intervention. By stepping forward at that precise moment, Beijing signaled that it was no longer content with playing an economic role in Latin America. Instead, it was moving into the security arena, a domain once considered untouchable. For decades, China's footprint in the region was defined by commerce infrastructure loans, mining investments, port construction, and telecommunications expansion. Unlike Russia, which maintained intelligence and defense cooperation with Caracas, Beijing avoided openly challenging U.S. military influence in the hemisphere. Yet the geopolitical tides have shifted, with global tensions rising, Washington increasing restrictions on Chinese tech and trade, and the U.S. Navy tightening its presence in the South China Sea. Beijing has identified Latin America as a valuable counter-pressure zone. Analysts from Reuters and DW point out that every U.S. move in the Indo-Pacific now echoes in Beijing's strategy toward the Americas. Asia Times described Washington's renewed threats against Venezuela as a gift to China, a chance to challenge U.S. dominance without risking a clash in Asia. The logic is brutally simple. By helping Venezuela, China can stretch U.S. resources, test diplomatic resolve, and demonstrate to the world that no region is out of reach. The more the United States tightens pressure on China in the Pacific, the more Beijing can lean into opportunities elsewhere. Beijing is not building a military base, at least not yet, but it is setting the foundation for a long-term presence through technology training and defense integration. For President Trump, the situation creates a dangerous dilemma. Responding too aggressively risks drawing the United States into a multi-front escalation, while responding too slowly risks signaling weakness at a time when U.S. credibility is already being tested in Europe and the Middle East. These calculations mirror global patterns in Ukraine. Russia probes NATO's red lines. In the Red Sea, Iran challenges maritime security. In the Taiwan Strait, China tests U.S. commitments through military sorties. Venezuela becomes one more node in this expanding web of strategic friction. As China's engagement deepens, the core question confronting Washington becomes more urgent. Is Beijing preparing merely to support an ally, or to carve out a permanent foothold in America's backyard? Russia's imprint on Venezuela's military landscape began long before China stepped forward, and it remains the backbone that allows Beijing to expand today without fear of immediate U.S. neutralization. Over the past decade, Moscow entrenched itself deeply within Caracas's defense structure, constructing a layered air defense shield that transformed Venezuela from a vulnerable state into one of the most fortified nations in the Western Hemisphere. Russian lawmakers openly confirmed the delivery of several divisions of the S-300VM system, one of the most capable long-range surface-to-air missile platforms outside Russia's own borders. Alongside it came the Buk M2E medium-range system and the Panzer S point defense batteries. Together, these systems formed a tri-level network designed to deter aerial intrusion, complicate surveillance flights, and raise the cost of any U.S. intervention. This architecture matters because it created strategic space room for China to act without risking the rapid destruction of its equipment or advisors. Moscow's long-term presence gives Beijing what it rarely enjoys outside Asia, an already built defensive umbrella. Russia is in effect the shield. China can now become the spear. This divide mirrors the global alignment visible in Ukraine and Syria, where Russia handles ground-based air defense and electronic warfare, while partners fill offensive or technological gaps. In Venezuela, the pattern repeats with unmistakable clarity. Russian support extends beyond missiles. Moscow has been working closely with Caracas to maintain and modernize its Sa-30 Mk2 fighter fleet. These twin-engine jets form the backbone of Venezuela's air force, and without Russian technical assistance, spare parts and pilot training the fleet would have degraded long ago. By sustaining operational readiness, Russia ensures that Venezuela retains credible air combat capability, an essential prerequisite for any future Chinese technology integration. Even today, Russian crews reportedly assist with radar calibration and operational drills, ensuring that Venezuela's air defense network remains synchronized and functional. Washington's concern is not limited to hardware. Russia's embedded advisors represent an intelligence bridge that connects South America with Moscow's broader strategic planning. Analysts at DW and The Guardian note that Russia's presence in Venezuela provides the Kremlin with forward-situated electronic warfare and signals intelligence opportunities capabilities that could monitor U.S. naval movements in the Caribbean or assess the response times of Southern Command. Each radar sweep, each aircraft intercept generates data that can be relayed to Moscow, refining Russian models of U.S. reaction patterns. This deepening relationship creates a geopolitical echo of Ukraine, where Russian deployments hardened the front line and allowed Moscow to experiment with anti-access strategies intended to deter NATO. In Venezuela, the deterrent is aimed squarely at the United States. It is a quiet reminder Russian systems can appear near U.S. borders just as American systems appear near Russia's. The symmetry entry is deliberate, and it signals a new era where great powers apply pressure not only abroad but in each other's near environment. With Russia shaping the defensive backbone and China stepping in with modern offensive and surveillance systems, the hemisphere risks sliding into a dynamic not seen since the Cold War I, where rival blocs position themselves within striking distance. And as both powers continue to entrench their influence, the unanswered question grows harder to ignore. How far will Russia go to protect the new security triangle forming in Caracas? China's expanding arsenal for Caracas represents more than a simple upgrade. It is a decisive escalation that could redraw the military balance in the Western Hemisphere. With Venezuela formally requesting Chinese systems, the conversation has shifted from speculation to expectation. Beijing now has a strategic opening, and the capabilities under consideration could transform Venezuela from a regional power with aging assets into a modernized force capable of challenging U.S. operations near its airspace and coastline. Among the most consequential platforms is the J-10CE, China's export-oriented 4.5 generation fighter jet, built around an AESA radar designed for long-range detection and strong resistance to electronic warfare. The J-10CE would immediately outperform Venezuela's older Su-30 Mk2s in situational awareness and air-to-air precision. Analysts highlight its potential combat radius of up to 2,000 kilometers and its compatibility with PL-15 long-range missiles reportedly capable of striking targets nearly 200 kilometers away. For Washington, such a deployment would mean a new non-Russian aircraft capable of threatening U.S. patrol aircraft or surveillance assets in the Caribbean. Equally transformative is the potential arrival of the Wing-Lung-2 drone, one of the world's most widely exported armed UAVs. Its 32-hour endurance, 9,000-meter operating ceiling, and ability to carry multiple precision weapons make it invaluable for persistent surveillance, a weakness long identified in Venezuela's defense posture. With these drones, Caracas could monitor illegal maritime activity, track foreign naval deployments, or target hostile vessels without committing pilots. The drones also provide a deniable strike capability, offering Caracas a precision tool for asymmetric deterrence. In theaters such as the Middle East and North Africa, Wing-Lung systems have already demonstrated how low-cost unmanned platforms can shift tactical calculus. Beyond aircraft, advanced radar systems represent one of the most strategically sensitive upgrades China could deliver. The JY-27A long-range radar offers detection distances of up to 500 kilometers and operates in the VHF band, significantly improving the ability to track stealth aircraft or low observable drones. Integrated into Venezuela's existing Russian-built network, it would create one of the most comprehensive early warning systems in Latin America. For U.S. forces, the presence of such a radar complicates reconnaissance missions and increases the risk profile of operations near Venezuelan airspace. China's HQ-17AE short-range air defense system further strengthens Venezuela's lowest defensive tier. With rapid reaction times and 360-degree engagement capability, it complements the Russian Pantsir S units already deployed, creating a dense multi-layered network that would challenge cruise missiles, drones, and low-flying aircraft. Together, these tools form a deterrent structure reminiscent of the integrated anti-access zones used by China in the South China Sea and by Russia in Kaliningrad and Syria. The symbolism of these platforms matters as much as their function. For the first time, Chinese and Russian military technologies could operate side by side in the Western Hemisphere, forming an integrated shield aimed not at hypothetical threats, but at countering U.S. power projection. With President Trump under mounting pressure to reassert American dominance after turbulent global confrontations, any significant Chinese deployment could force Washington into rapid strategic recalibration. The parallels are clear in Ukraine. Advanced Western weapons change the battlefield. In the Middle East, Iranian drones reshape deterrence. In the Indo-Pacific, Chinese naval expansion tests American resolve. Venezuela becomes the next link in this global pattern, a testing ground for multipolar military influence. As Caracas moves closer to finalizing these procurements, one looming question grows harder to ignore. If China delivers a full suite of modern systems, could Venezuela become the first South American state equipped to resist U.S. military pressure in a meaningful, sustained way? The deepening triangle between China, Russia, and Venezuela does not exist in isolation. It is part of a widening pattern in which great powers test US influence across multiple regions simultaneously. What is unfolding in Caracas echoes dynamics already visible in Ukraine, the Middle East, and the Indo-Pacific. In every theater, rivals probe for vulnerabilities, assess American resolve, and attempt to reshape the global balance of power. The Western Hemisphere, once considered strategically predictable, is now the newest arena in this global contest. For US officials, the fear is not merely that Venezuela is being armed, but that the strategic logic behind the buildup mirrors adversarial maneuvers elsewhere, signaling a coordinated push to dilute American dominance at a moment when the international system is under severe strain. In Eastern Europe, the grinding conflict in Ukraine continues to absorb Western political bandwidth. Russia's adaptation to long-range strikes, drone warfare, and layered air defense has forced NATO to expand its commitments and resources. Analysts at Reuters and DW point out that Russia's military learning curve does not remain confined to Ukraine. It informs how Moscow advises partners abroad, including Venezuela. Techniques refined on the Ukrainian front sensor integration, counter-stealth tactics, electronic interference can be exported to strengthen deterrence in South America. If Russia views Venezuela as a pressure point parallel to NATO's presence in Eastern Europe, then every escalation in Europe may have an echo in the Caribbean. Similarly, in the Middle East, the ongoing Israel-Iran confrontation has injected volatility into global security planning. Iranian drone swarms, precision missile attacks, and proxy operations have transformed regional warfare, revealing capabilities that can threaten even technologically superior militaries. US Central Command has warned repeatedly that Iran's tactics are reshaping conflict dynamics from Gaza to the Red Sea. Analysts now fear that Iran's growing cooperation with Venezuela, combined with Chinese and Russian influence, could extend this style of asymmetric warfare to the Western Hemisphere. Though Iran's role in Caracas remains smaller, its willingness to support Venezuela's military posture signals how multiple adversaries can converge to complicate US strategy. In the Indo-Pacific, China's persistence in challenging US naval dominance forms the final link in this global chain. Beijing's maneuvers around Taiwan, its militarized artificial islands, and its expansive surveillance network serve a clear purpose to stretch US commitments and test response thresholds. Washington's increased naval presence in the region, coupled with high-stakes trade disputes, has raised tensions between the two powers to levels unseen in decades. If China perceives US actions in the Pacific as containment, its willingness to strengthen Venezuela becomes logical, a mirror move designed to remind Washington that geographic insulation is no longer guaranteed. The convergence of these global tensions places President Donald Trump in a complex strategic environment unlike any his predecessors faced. Each crisis interacts with another. Each rival responds to American pressure not only locally but globally. In this interconnected world, Venezuela becomes more than a bilateral dispute. It becomes a symbol of whether the US can sustain its influence on multiple fronts without overextension. If great powers continue to synchronize their challenges, American credibility will increasingly depend on how the White House navigates these simultaneous flashpoints. Against this backdrop, one question looms over Washington's strategic planners. If adversaries coordinate across regions, can the United States afford to treat Venezuela as a secondary theater, or is it becoming the frontline test of American strength? Behind the sweeping geopolitical maneuvers beyond the missile systems and diplomatic warnings lies a human story that is often overshadowed by strategy. Venezuela's population, already strained by years of economic collapse, political repression, and mass migration, now finds itself positioned at the center of a global power contest it did not choose. As China and Russia deepen their presence and the United States increases military pressure, ordinary citizens face growing instability. Each strategic move ripples through daily life in subtle but unmistakable ways: heightened military alerts, expanded coastal patrols, and a tightening security atmosphere that blurs the line between protection and fear. The global rivalry playing out above their heads becomes a constant reminder that their nation is no longer simply a domestic crisis zone, it is a geopolitical stage. For families living near major ports, air bases, and radar sites, the buildup of foreign-backed defenses has created a landscape marked by checkpoints and surveillance. Parents worry about sons drafted into expanding security forces. Communities fear that any miscalculation between great powers could turn Venezuelan territory into a battleground. This anxiety mirrors what civilians in Ukraine, Gaza, or Taiwan experience the dread of becoming collateral in contests shaped far away. The more Venezuela's leadership leans on security partnerships with Russia, China, and Iran, the more citizens feel caught between loyalty demands and survival priorities. Human rights groups warn that increasing militarization often leads to stricter government control, fewer civil liberties, and a shrinking space for dissent. Yet the impact extends beyond Venezuela's borders. Neighboring Colombia and Brazil watch nervously as new radar and missile systems appear near shared frontiers. Regional trade routes already fragile face further disruption as tensions escalate. Economic migrants fleeing Venezuela encounter greater scrutiny, and humanitarian agencies warn that any military confrontation, whether intentional or accidental, could trigger another mass displacement wave. The hemisphere, still recovering from pandemic-era economic shocks, now faces the possibility of a destabilizing conflict at its northern rim. Inside the United States, the human dimension unfolds differently. Communities in Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Florida follow the situation with growing unease. Military families stationed at Southern Command or aboard Caribbean patrol vessels understand that shifts in Venezuela's defense posture directly affect their deployment schedules and operational risks. For American citizens, the standoff highlights a broader fear resurfacing across the world that global tensions are eroding the buffer zones that once felt secure. Meanwhile, Venezuela's leadership frames the arrival of Chinese and Russian support as a path to sovereignty. For many Venezuelans tired of foreign sanctions and economic isolation, the promise of stability, however fragile, offers a glimmer of hope. Yet others worry that their country is becoming a pawn, its autonomy increasingly entangled in global rivalries. This divide reflects a deeper philosophical struggle over the meaning of freedom, security, and national identity in an era of great power resurgence. As the hemisphere watches this tightening triangle of influence, one final question remains unresolved, and it will determine the future of millions. Will Venezuela become a stabilizing fortress for its allies, or the flashpoint that pulls the Americas into a new era of confrontation? The escalating standoff in Venezuela illustrates how the Western Hemisphere has become a new arena in the global struggle for power among the United States, China, and Russia. Once viewed as a region insulated from great power rivalry, Latin America now hosts a strategic contest with consequences extending far beyond its borders. China's unprecedented political defense of Caracas, combined with Venezuela's direct request for military support, signaled a dramatic shift pushing Beijing into America's backyard. Russia, already entrenched through S-300 VM systems, Buk M2E batteries, Panzer defenses, and Su-30 modernization programs, provides the shield that enables China to expand confidently. Beijing's potential delivery of J-10C fighters, Wing-Lung drones, long-range radars, and HQ-17AE air defense units could transform Venezuela into a fortified outpost capable of complicating U.S. operations in the Caribbean. This evolution echoes global tensions. Russia pressures NATO in Ukraine, Iran shapes asymmetric conflict in the Middle East, and China challenges U.S. naval dominance in the Indo-Pacific. For civilians across Venezuela and neighboring states, the human cost of militarization grows as economic pressures, security restrictions, and regional uncertainty intensify. Ultimately, the hemisphere faces a defining question: is Venezuela becoming a bulwark of multipolar power, or the spark that could ignite a wider confrontation in the Americas?